Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
I'm Strimban.
And we are looking at Through a Glass Darkly.
Tidigt på morgonen väcks jag av att någon kallar på mig med bestämd röst. Jag stiger upp och går till det här rummet. En dag var det någon som ropade på mig precis bakom tapeten. Jag tittade in i garderoben, men där var det tomt. Men rösten fortsatte att kalla på mig, så jag tryckte mig mot väggen och den gav vika som ett lövverk. Och så var jag där inne. Du tror att jag hittar på, va? Jag kommer in i ett stort rum. Det är alldeles ljust och stilla. Människor rör sig fram och tillbaka. Och några talar till mig så att jag förstår. Det är så skönt och jag är trygg. Och från somliga ansikten så kommer det som ett lysande ljus. Alla väntar på honom som ska komma. Men ingen oroar sig.
This film marks the first in a trilogy that over time has become known as the God and Man trilogy. Bergman directed all three, the first one being this, the second one being Winter Light, the third being The Silence. What I think is really interesting about Through a Glass Darkly is that it is very simplistic, in particular the cast, there's only 4 of them, and also in the setting.
Mm-hmm. He really isolates the 4 characters on a small island, and even within that island there's really only one setting, which is the house that they are there for the summer. So it really creates a lot of boundaries around kind of what's happening in the film, which gives them a lot more room to explore the interiority of the characters, in particular their mental state.
You delve into the story that seemingly is already in progress, and as the film plays out, little tidbits are revealed to you about the characters, about the situation that has existed since.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit frustrating because you don't know exactly what's going on, and references are made to things that you feel are very important for you to understand the whole balance and conclusion of the story, but they're revealed at such a prolonged pace that you really don't see the whole picture till the end, which in a way makes it good because you're continuously looking for more information and trying to get more out of the film. But at the same time, I'm not sure if it would have really changed the nature of the film if he would have revealed some of the facts earlier on.
In particular, what we're talking about here is Karen and the fact that she has some sort of mental disorder. We don't really know what it is. The first scene where this is really discussed involves the father and his son-in-law discussing what has been going on with Karen. We know something's wrong with her. It sounds like it's fatal. We don't know what or why. And that's really it for quite a while.
The other thing that's a little bit kind of challenging but also compelling in the film is the fact that from the onset there are all these tensions, but you can't quite put your finger on what the source is. So the characters, the way that they interact amongst themselves and some of the references and the looks and things that they're giving each other, it's always hinting at some kind of larger truth, but you don't really know what it is. And so it starts to escalate and build through the film, and it's actually also a really good pacing metaphor for the escalation of her insanity.
What I found particularly unique about this film was the way that Bergman handled mental illness, and the fact that he didn't fall into any sort of cliches, or he wasn't particularly overt in what you would expect Karen to experience. There's a lot of moments that are very vague and mysterious, and you learn more about Karen as a person and Karen's struggles than you do about Karen's nuts or something like that, which I think a lot of other films would have fallen into that trap, and I think you can go through film history and see a lot of movies that would have handled this situation differently. Instead, we get little nuances that Bergman chooses. For example, the island. Putting her on the island is also isolating her mentally. There's some sort of parallels between the two, and even parallels between the family struggle within themselves.
I agree with that. I think he does a really good job of kind of mirroring her mental state with her actual physical surroundings. And there's different types of scenes where she's either ascending into the attic or, let's say, descending into the belly of that shipwreck.
Yeah.
And those things symbolize the highs and lows of her mental state, basically. The elements of escalation that he depicted in the movie, of kind of her illness coming back to her and her getting more and more confused and more lost in this other reality that is a part of her illness, her visions. She hears voices. She's convinced that there's, other people in the house, an alternate universe. All those, brought on by degrees, were very subtle and very masterfully done, I think, through Bergman's direction, but also through Harriet Anderson's performance, which I think is one of the best to date.
Yeah, I think Harriet Anderson kind of gets, in a way, forgotten in this film, I think, when people remember it. But I think this is her most challenging role. And she doesn't overdo it.
No, I think that's the key point here, is nothing is overdone throughout the movie. It's very authentic in the way that they're representing someone really struggling with this illness, because we see her going back and forth. There are still moments when she's lucid, when she recognizes that she herself is ill, that she's mixing things up, that she's hurting people around her, and that she's not well. And yet, in her moments of delusion, she can't control herself, and she's equally as convinced that the things she's seeing are real and that it's the other people that are not well. She's the one who can actually see the truth. And for me, that's very reminiscent of often how literary narrative sometimes portrays mental illness. In particular, it reminds me of the story The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, where you also have a female character, and it's a really deep dive into that character's psyche as it becomes fractured. And what happens towards the end of the story and towards the end of this film is the psychosis and the reality become fused, and she just loses herself in it.
I think in a short story, some of the more symbolic elements work a little bit better than they do in Through a Glass Darkly. And while I really enjoyed the film, I mean, the one thing that I had a problem with was that descending into the ship. It was kind of heavy-handed. It was heavy symbolism from Bergman. And I mean, he's prone to doing things like that all the time. But what did you think of...
I really enjoyed that. I mean, I think the element of insanity in this film really gives him a lot of room to play with things like crazy symbols, because there is no logic to why she would be on the lawn sunbathing 1 minute or something, and then all of a sudden vanish, and her poor little brother is frantically searching for her, and then she ends up at the bottom of this like rotted out shipwreck. There's no logic to that. There's no reasoning. It's simply raw emotion, a raw mental state that's how it's manifested, There's also no real explanation for why her mental illness would take this sudden turn of her wanting to seduce her own little brother.
It's interesting that he chose a female lead to portray this struggle, because, as we know, Bergman has chosen women as his main characters for most of his films at this point. And this is sort of a deeper effort from him to sort of get into the psyche of a woman, but also one with probably some of the most troubling issues of any of the characters he's studied so far.
I wonder what it is that really leads him towards that. I wonder if he, as a director, maybe even as a person, might feel that the female psyche is more prone to this kind of brokenness or to this kind of complexity. Because I feel that through the movies that we've seen so far, some of the most complex characters have been female.
But also, I think that in some ways, by going to another female character as he has a more sympathetic ear from the audience. And also, I think there's a little bit more curiosity. If we flip it and consider that a man could have played this role, this wouldn't have been the story that was told. I don't think that we would have felt the same for the struggles he was going through. And if he raped his little sister, it would have been an entirely different tale.
That would have been really bad.
And I think Bergman knows what he's dealing with, and the gender politics, and it's an interesting film in the way it is, because I think there's an extra level of mystery. It's also worth noting that this is the first time that Bergman has really thrown a female character actively into that debate of religion and the presence of God. Usually they end up being sort of observers on the periphery of some man's struggle inside himself, but not in this case.
Karen's character really does seem to be on this kind of quest-like search to find the truth behind her visions, right? And as the film progresses, they become increasingly more powerful, and she becomes further and further taken into them. So on the one hand, I feel like it's a little bit disappointing that Bergman backs away from the more authentic narrative of someone losing their mind and trying to really dig into that and explore that and unpack it in film, and then reverts to his usual, which is it's about God. It's about, does God exist or does God not exist? That kind of paradigm, where for him it seems like a lot of all the great dilemmas are reduced to that, which is frustrating for me, because I think it's larger than that here, and he could have been more robust with what he tried to tell us about people, just the interiority of the character. But on the flip side, like you mentioned, I think it is interesting that for the first time he's giving a woman the kind of mental capacity to really engage with that question, because we haven't seen that before. And it's almost a little bit sad that the only way that he could bring a woman to that is by having her completely lose her mind.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, I was going to criticize the film in one way, it would be that final moment between father and son, where Bergman really goes back to that dilemma of religion and
what does it all mean?
Exactly. And I felt like the scene raised a question that didn't need to be raised. I mean, the film could have been tied up as it was, and instead we're leaving thinking the same debate about God and what was Bergman trying to say when the son's father spoke to him.
And really the answer that he gets, again, like you're saying, is the same answer that we're always hearing from Bergman, which is God may or may not exist, but the closest that we'll ever get to his truth, capital H, capital T, is love. Humans are able to love, and that's what elevates us above beasts. I thought the film was good, and it took a lot of really challenging topics and very bravely approached them. But then at the end, again, it's like his crutch that he always returns to, and it's just, I think it robs the film.
And as a side note to our debate, as I watched this, I looked over to you and I said, you know, they would not make this film today. If this film was made today and these dilemmas were brought up as the subject matter, it would be told as a horror film. We see the same kind of struggle, but it's always someone who's possessed, often a woman actually. But Bergman obviously didn't have to grapple with the days of current cinema where commercialization is towards horror films, but I just found that an interesting parallel. That being said, Through Glass Darkly, I think, is a very notable film and definitely essential Bergman. Do you agree?
I agree. I think it's one of the best ones we've watched so far of this decade. And I think if you're a Harriet Anderson fan, it's a must-watch.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Breaking Down Bergman, but we are going to continue our way through the trilogy with the second of the films, Winter Light. So be sure to join us then, but in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Or join our conversation on Facebook.
And we will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman.